activity, according to a study by the analysis group. So that's why we really think that using that revenue effectively can cut more carbon, and it can have those benefits of poverty alleviation, job creation, helping workers find new work who are displaced, investing it into clean energy R&D. There's a number of things that could really benefit from that. And let's see. Let me just look at my notes here real quick. I think, and I just want to juxtapose a little bit of between us and Carbon Washington. One of the concerns is, well, now with Tim Eyman's initiative passing, well, we don't know if it's going to pass. There's going to be lawsuits and stuff, so we'll see how it all works out. But as of right now, the sales tax is already decreased by 1%, thanks if his thing passes. So Carbon Washington's initiative may not be revenue neutral anymore. It may be revenue positive because there's no sales tax to cut because Eyman's already cut it. But either way, we think that the poor people who really suffer from paying a sales tax, rather than giving them a sales tax cut, it's probably more effective to invest in some type of a program that benefits them more directly, because you're also giving a sales tax cut to Bill Gates and to Russell Wilson. Well, they're great people. They probably don't need a sales tax break. And also that sales tax break, it's not very stimulative in terms of clean energy. We're not going to stimulate much clean energy or energy efficiency with the sales tax break. And also we recognize the importance of protecting manufacturers who are trade exposed. And I think that's the principle behind the B&O tax break. But there could be a concern by providing a blanket B&O tax exemption. Rather, what might be more effective is using a formula that was in the governor's bill that would have had the Department of Commerce find out which industries are actually trade exposed and at risk of moving if they have to pay higher energy costs. And it may be more effective to give them a targeted break rather than a blanket B&O exemption. And also, there are some industries that are already exempt from the B&O tax. There's a question of how much Boeing will benefit from a B&O tax break. Alcoa is already exempt, and they're a big manufacturer. And there's there may be a more effective use of those funds to even benefit the manufacturers rather than a blanket B&O tax break and the sales tax break. While we certainly think they are good in intention and in spirit, there may be still potentially better ways. Next slide, please. And so I also want you guys to know that what we do in Washington State matters. I mean, the United States, as you probably know, is the world's leading emitter of greenhouse gases. So we can't expect the world to really do much unless we show we're doing something. And so we can do that in Washington. We can link up with British Columbia, California, and Oregon, and we can create the 5th biggest economy in the world in terms of GDP. And that will really help U.S. climate negotiators now, and they're going to have to continue negotiating even after Paris. And we can have a huge economy of scale, and that's Governor Inslee, Kitzhaber, and Brown, and the Premier of British Columbia kind of getting together to show that they were actually like forming a Pacific Coast Climate Collaborative. So they're already trying to do it, and I think having that price on carbon is going to help with that. Next slide, please. And I think it's I also want to show that California is just a truly remarkable state. I mean, I consider it to be a utopia of environmental policy, and it also shows that their GDP is going up, but the emissions per GDP is dropping. Job growth in California is 3.3%. Rest of the nation, 2.5%. So it's really demonstrating, it's really disproving the idea that this is bad for the economy. And there was a great report put out by the Center for American Progress that showed if we have a national price on carbon, some investment in clean energy, I don't remember the exact specifics of their report now, but I know it was a national carbon price, it could cut the national unemployment rate by 1% by 2030. That's really because, as I'm sure all you guys know, renewable energy is more labor intensive, as is energy efficiency. $1 million in a renewable energy program creates about 4 times as many jobs as $1 million in a fossil fuel program. And clean energy also has more domestic content. That's particularly true in our state. About $10 billion a year on gasoline. Of the 14 billion we spend on gasoline, about 10 of it goes to pad the pockets of somebody out of state. We don't produce any fossil fuels in our state. So if we start producing solar, energy efficiency, using hydro for electricity, all of that in state will stimulate more economic activity and create local jobs. And And next slide, please. And I just want to close by emphasizing the point that Clean Energy Canada, a very respected group, just came out with a report on British Columbia's carbon tax. And as I'm sure all of you may or may not know, but BC's emissions are now going up from 2012 to 2013. They've increased by 1% because they don't have the political will to raise their tax. They have no cap. And so Clean Energy Canada said that they need to jack up their carbon price, but they also need to start investing some of that money into clean energy. And because BC is also revenue negative right now. That means they're giving out more in tax breaks than they're taking in the tax. And so unfortunately, there's no mechanism in carbon WASP policy to have a true up where we could give out more in sales and B&O taxes and take in less in carbon taxes. And we know our state's already starving for revenue. So I don't know that we may not be well advised to run that risk. So that's why I just want to emphasize a policy with a cap guarantees emissions go down, and investment lowers the cost of clean energy. And of course, a price on carbon stimulates that investment too. But you need all three, I think, to have effective climate policy. And but I appreciate Carbon Washington's passion. I appreciate everybody's passion who wants to price carbon. It's just about what we can all agree on is the most effective policy. And as President Obama said, in his inaugural address, the United States must lead on clean energy, and that we must. And I think we can by taking some important steps here. And I would really appreciate it if you guys would be willing to commit to signing a thing that I'm going to pass around, or you would be committing to collect signatures for us in January. So thank you, and I can take questions.
There we go.
Sorry, I didn't know you.
No worries. Q&A time. So I'm just going to look around the room and randomly assign somebody to ask questions. Okay, unless somebody raises their hand.
Can you speak to how your program could possibly initiate or stimulate an REC program, an REC market in Washington State, renewable energy credits, which have been used to fund or incentivize solar in other states?
I actually, offhand, I can't say that it necessarily would, because I think since we already have Initiative 937, the Renewable Energy Standard, I believe there are already RECs traded for that. So this will certainly, it can stimulate investment in solar power and renewable power in our state by directly putting money into those programs, for example. But and Johnny, you may be able to correct me here, but I don't think it will stimulate RECs per se, because I think that's unique to a renewable energy standard. Well, sure, unless I'm wrong here.
RECs are the equivalent of megawatt hour. So whatever you created, if you build a large solar plant or wind, you can bundle or unbundle the REC and sell it. So it doesn't, we've mandated under 937 that you have to be a certain amount, each utility has to be a certain, that qualifies, has to be a certain amount of their energy production, 15% by 2020. And they can do that with actual power or with REC. So it's much more marketable.
There would be permits that could potentially be traded in our program that represent a ton of pollution.
I have a question. We talked when we were listening to Mike. He touched on the subject of economic justice, and you touched on it a little bit. But could you expand on how in California they translate or modeling after California, how our state would translate cash that would be available into things like solar for low-income homes or properties, lowering the cost of access to solar, things specific to this room, and then also who in the Alliance here or in California works on that objective, getting more solar per the program.
So we have individual members of the Alliance that work on solar policy, like Johnny or NWEC, but I'd say we're not. I don't think we have somebody who's like specifically solar in the Alliance. It's just renewable energy broadly as the policies. I mean, as far as identifying communities, I think one way you could do it is by having a map of air pollution hotspots, and you could and air pollution hotspots could be correlated with low income communities, and you could direct investment in those areas. So as far as a specific program that, yeah, I mean, I can't rattle off any off the top of my head because we don't know exactly what it's going to go into. But like the thing I showed on my slide, like California has something that provides low-income access to rooftop solar. So something like that could be done here. Just offhand, I think one thing I would say is California probably has a different electricity profile than we do. So putting solar here, we'd want to see how much carbon it's going to cut, because it may cut less than it would down in California. And that's partly why I brought up the fact that let's see if we can replace the heating oil and natural gas with solar. And so that could be something we could look into. But there's programs that we need to develop and think about. And when we get to that point, we'd certainly welcome your input. Or you can give me your input now, I guess.
So Mayor, Puget Sound Solar is a business partner of the Alliance, and we're involved in the conversations about the carbon offset value of solar kilowatt hours. So we're working on that. What do they have to do with it?
They're in Florida.
Those guys are putting out other fires.
Hi, my question is really for both of you. You had mentioned that we really need probably one strong initiative to be on the ballot. What's going to happen? Have your two groups worked together to try to come up with one strong initiative? What if both of them get on the ballot and neither passes? What's going to happen? So I know that's not going to be an easy question to answer, but I really want to know what's going to happen. We really need one bill, and we need you guys to get together and come up with one.
Well, I think quickly one thing I'll say is that legally I think both measures could be on the ballot, and they wouldn't. I don't think they would conflict with each other. But our polling shows that having two carbon pricing measures on the ballot is very bad, and so the oil industry would easily knock it down. So we only want one, and we are continuously talking with Carbon Washington, the Alliance members and Carbon Washington members, to figure out a solution.
I'm not involved in those conversations, but I talk to the people who are. So we agree that having two is a non-starter. They'll kill each other. Just bottom line. They'll both go down. So there have been conversations between the leaders of both groups, and in the handout that I gave you, you'll see the joint letter or the joint statement that the two groups made last spring, in which they agreed to, first of all, continue talking, but they agreed on two primary things that, besides saying they weren't endorsing each other. They agreed that it was okay for their supporters to endorse either one. We have continued to stand by that. The Alliance has not. They've started telling people, as Samir did tonight, not to endorse Carbon Washington. When I said earlier, support one of us, I actually should have said support one or both of us, because we don't care. We're happy to have your support. We're happy to have you support both. It's fine with us. The second thing in there was we agreed, the leaders agreed, to try not to have competing initiatives. So Carbon Washington is weeks away from finishing its signature drive. We, unless some great weird thing happens, we are going to the legislature in January. And if they don't adopt it, we will be on the ballot in November 2016. So from that point of view, the ball's kind of in the Alliance's court. We've developed our policy. We've gotten it very close to being approved. And the question at this point is the alliance going to compete with us? Or are they going to do something complementary, or are they going to pivot and support our policy? Because our policy accomplishes an awful lot of very good things. And so we're waiting to see what they want to do. But my understanding is that there hasn't been any real productive conversation yet around trying to hammer out something different. At this point, our policy's done. We can't change it. Only thing we could do would be withdraw it. And that would seem rather silly when we've actually finished the job. I'd find it hard to see that happening, but I'm not the person who makes that decision.
Can I respond? Yeah, and he's right. We did issue a joint statement. That was before we did the polling. After we did the polling, we saw that Carbon Wah's initiative, partly and given that it begins with the word taxes, polled at 39% initially. And we've been talking with Carbon Wah since then. Even before Carbon Washington went to collect signatures, the Communities of Color table met with their leaders, Yoram and others, to try to come up with a policy that had more stakeholder input. And so people might be like, well, why don't you have a policy yet? Well, you want to be thoughtful and deliberate when you're coming up with a policy on the ballot, because you're going to go up against $30 million of spending in the oil industry. You're going to have people like Tim Eyman, who might already cut your sales tax and change your policy initiative. That's why you want to wait and incorporate feedback. And so that's, and I'm not saying this as a knock on Carbon Washington. Their professor, their guy, Yoram Bauman, was my professor, taught me everything I know about carbon pricing. But I think our concern with Carbon Wah is that they didn't do sufficient stakeholder input. They kind of went with the policy they had when, and the fact that we're taking so long to develop our policy is a testament to the diversity of people from whom we're trying to gather feedback from. We have communities of color who are saying no trading. We have businesses who are saying we need that, or labor who's saying we need investment in workers. And so it's good to have all these ideas here and work it out. And we will work it out, and we will work it out with Carbon Washington because we're going to be pushing for something that's going to reduce emissions.
So I have to say once again, the Alliance's polling data, not public. So there's no way for us all to evaluate it and decide what it actually says. Love to see them release it. As far as Tim Eyman's initiative is concerned, I don't think there's any conflict with our policy. Our policy would just drop the sales tax 1% more, but then offset that with carbon revenue. So it's the same whether you implement Tim Eyman's initiative or not. If Tim Eyman's initiative happens, the state gets a $1 billion hole blown in its budget.
You have to look at the language in Carbon Wah's initiative and Eyman's. They both say going from 6.5 to 5.5. So it won't be a double reduction. It'll be like Eyman will have already done the job that you guys would do, because you guys say 6.5 to 5.5. Eyman says the same thing.
Well, we couldn't foresee that Eyman was going to do that, so I'd find it hard to believe that the courts would decide that ours was invalid because somebody came along and did something that wasn't even known when we wrote our language. But that's a question for lawyers. Neither one of us is a lawyer, so we're not going to be able to answer it.
I got to admit, we're also running out of time, but now I really want to hear what Johnny Bosch has to say from Northwest Energy Coalition, because she's next.
It's 8 o'clock right now. Ooh. So. Need a ride somewhere? I can drive. I can give you a ride.
We have offers of a ride.
I just have a calculus question. What if you go to the legislature and they say, hey, this is a great idea, we'll pass this? It's a done deal. And then we go with this other initiative. Can we do both that way?
In theory, yes, you can do both. It's hard to see that happening, but they could, in theory. In theory, they both could get passed, and then I guess the courts would, or the regulators would figure out how to harmonize the two. I have no idea how that would play out, but yes, it's theoretically possible. Yeah.
I'm Johnny Bosch. I'm with the Northwest Energy Coalition, and Patrick asked if I could make a few comments about where the coalition is on this issue, and also, you want to change that? Okay. Some of the issues that will be coming up to the legislature that might affect from a different angle both of these issues. The coalition, if you don't know it, is made up of 100 and some businesses or entities or organizations, and it's in the process right now of looking at a policy it adopted back in 2008, excuse me, dealing with carbon pricing and cap and trade, and looking at balancing the interests of all the members. And the members are not of one mind. There's been this process going on, and they will be possibly talking about it at the December meeting, possibly talking about at the spring meeting of taking an official position of some kind. But we have everything from utility members who aren't supportive of either position to other folks who think we need probably 12 bills, and these two would be a good start getting to that 12 to have like California has. So there isn't a real clear path at this moment. We're working on this as thoughtfully as we can. So I don't have much to share beyond that. I'm just telling you we're in the process. The legislature could, I think, also not only if they rejected the Carbon Law petition and came up with their own, and you got in the ballot, you might have 3 issues on the ballot. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this. The legislature is going to be pretty busy in a short session, and Jeremy should probably jump up here and throw some things in too, because he's been following the legislature pretty closely. Since this is a 2-year cycle for the Washington legislature, all those wonderful bills that were introduced last year that didn't go anywhere are still alive. I like to call them my zombie friends, because we had 10 bad bills last year that attacked either 937, the Energy Independence Act that established our renewable portfolio standard, either in part or in whole, and they're all back in one shape or another. And so I may be coming back to you all asking for support to either stop some bad stuff or call your legislators and tell them this is a waste of time, that we need to let it go. We had one bill that was a good bill that we're still working on, that we're looking at the post-2020 timeframe. As you know, with the RPS, when we hit 15% in 2020, that 15% that the utilities have to provide as renewable continues on. We are proposing that in this world of relatively flat growth, that any need for new resources be met with renewables or conservation or a combination thereof. And so it would change a little bit, but it would keep us moving on a trajectory where we're not frozen at that 15%. So we're working with a number of entities to try to work out a few details of that. I've been in conversations over the last couple of months with some of my fellow travelers on the NGO side and with some of the utilities, and we're looking at who has real interest in moving this forward. Realistically, I'm not sure we'll even get a hearing this year, because I think education is going to really suck everybody's brains into one vortex. So they're going to want to get out of there in 60 days, and they're going to want to go campaign. So whether we see a lot of progress will depend on how much they're hearing from their folks at home. So that's a very short version of, if that'll do it for you. Okay.
That's it. Thank you, folks, for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sorry we went long.
Sorry it went long. Was there somebody else who said they could give Johnny a ride? I see you last night.
Okay, that'd be great. I'm sorry we didn't ride, but we'll get it tomorrow for sure.
Okay, good.
Okay. If I can run out there and see if I can catch the bus. If I can't, then I'll come back and hit you up for the ride.
Or her.
Okay, I'll go with